PhD from John Innes and the Open University, and she's a plant pathologist at UCD, and her work boosts crop resilience to climate change. She's a Royal Irish Academy member and won the 2021 UCD Innovation Award. She's going to speak on plants, food security and human health.
Gormina Mohigat, Karen, thank you very much to the organisers. I work in UCD, but I live in Donegal. My heart's in Donegal. So I had the most beautiful drive from Gortahorkia down to here yesterday along the western coast. So I'm going to talk to you about, I'll just see, do the slides come up? Okay. Two minutes. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about plants, which is my passion. So I work in UCD in science and in agriculture. Is it not? There it is. And I'll start with the take-home messages. Okay, so the take-home message, just in case Karen cuts me off with her severe bell, is number one, we really need to have a renewed focus on crops. And I say crops in the broadest sense. I'm talking about horticulture and tillage crops here. And I'm not a horticulturalist, but I really hold the bell up for horticulture. It's really depleted in Ireland, and it's one of my bugbears. It's great to see the growing ground movement, but actually we need to do an awful lot more for horticulture. But we all know with climate change, and there's been big changes in EU legislation regarding crop production and Brexit, that we need a new green revolution. And for anyone who doesn't know what the green revolution was, it was in the 1960s where there was a need for an increased production in food. And two big things happened. If you went into a wheat field in the 1960s, it was my height. That means a lot of energy was going into the stem and very little relatively into grain. So a guy called Norman Borlaug bred using natural methods shorter plants. So now there's less energy going into grain, more energy going into grain and less into thing. That was big. And the other, of course, was the introduction of pesticides. So where are we now in terms of food systems? So, in Ireland we have Food Vision 2030, which we're already in 2026, and we have an awful lot to do. I just show you a couple of articles there relative to crops. One there from Richie Hackett saying, we export food, but as Mary said earlier, we import a lot of our diet. We saw the impact on, for example, fertilizers with the Iran war. And I draw your attention also to a policy document about increasing protein. We are very, very, very dependent on importing plant protein. And at EU level, that's very recognised, and the need for change is recognised. But we have a lot to do. I don't think this is working very well, but we'll bear with it. And in Ireland, we have a huge seed change to do to get there. So, am I going too high or too low? I draw your article. This is a really nice article written by Alison Bentley, who worked on wheat. And she wrote around the time of the war, the outbreak of the war, the fallacy that 2.5 billion people depend on 3 regions of the world for the majority of their wheat. And we really need to change our systems. So it's not just that we have to introduce biodiversity, which is the #1 challenge and should be the priority goal, but even on the crops we produce, we need to look at where structurally and globally we're producing those and move that around. So we have opportunities. A huge shock to me, I learned a lot 10 years ago. I'm a plant pathologist. What does that mean? I work on diseases of plants that reduce yield and make the food non-suitable, particularly in poorer regions and more underdeveloped regions of the world, but also in Ireland. And I was very excited 10 years ago to go and talk to some of the breeding companies that produce seed and say, I'm also interested in nutrition in the plant, because I realised there's a big connection, just like there's a connection for us between our health and the nutrition we're eating. There's a huge link in plants between plant diseases and the nutrition in the crop. And they said, our #1 goal is yield. We have no interest in nutrition. And that was really scary. Now it's changing, but it's very slow. There's pesticides directive. We use a lot of pesticides, particularly in Ireland, to control diseases, and we have to change. And we're really looking at biodiversity, increasing crop biodiversity with the focus on soils and more sustainable and efficient input systems. And I'm just going to look at a few examples, but before I do that, just to point out, there was a report called Crops 2030 that really summarised where the tillage sector, the crop sector in Ireland needs to go. But we need to work on that and go a lot further. We need to work, as we saw, there was a session on systems. I'll give you one example of a project we were involved in, where we said we need to reinvent the plant protein production on the island of Ireland. And when we do that, we need to not work in silos, but collectively. So from people like me working in a glasshouse with crops, to people working on behavioural change, people working on obesity, people working on nutrition, etc. And that's been very successful. One of the examples is the biggest crop we produce in Ireland is barley, but we import most of the flour to produce bread. Can we not produce bread from barley? Okay, it's a different type of bread. It's an older bread like they do in Morocco. That's just one example of the sort of things we were looking at there. We put a lot of chemicals on plants so that they grow well and we stop diseases. And we've put a lot of effort now, and it's one of the big areas, to say we don't need all the chemicals. Now, chemicals are not always bad. I don't use them myself. They're not. We need them in some ways, but we need to wean ourselves off them. And one of the ways is to look back at nature and to say, look to the past to inform the future. And when you look at wild relatives of old crops, and I'm going to show you the next slide here. So look at those three pictures. They're wild cereals. They're relatives of the crops that are cultivated. And when you look inside those, every little circle you see here is a different fungus that we got out of those. We cannot find those fungi in cultivated crops. Why? Successive breeding has changed the microbiome, the bugs that live in crops, and the application of chemicals has killed them. And I just show a shout out for the little picture down in the, I have problems left and right, left-hand corner there. That's a centre in Donegal that I work with, where they take in 30 children during the summer and they train them about plants and food production, Kilolta, and about biodiversity, using oats as an example. So it's a great potential to look at nature and to find bugs that control diseases, for example. We can look at nature and learn a lot that we have lost. Just to show you an example, two pictures here on the far side. The one in the middle is a wheat root, a cultivated wheat root with its natural organisms that you find in current day agriculture. The one on the far side, we added back the microbiome, these bugs that have been lost. And you see the size of the root is much bigger, and these are just plants, pots, showing you pots where they were growing. So that's really exciting. We know by working with nature and putting back biodiversity, we can actually improve plant productivity. But always the focus shouldn't be on yield. It should be about resilience, sustainability, and local systems. And genetics. And when I say genetics, I'm talking about the biodiversity we have, and great work with people such as Seed Savers, etc., do to look at the biodiversity that we have in our cropping systems. We know we have great heritage collections, and we can use those. We know that we can grow more diverse varieties. We have a very limited number of varieties that we grow. And we're responsible for that because I go into a shop and I look at bread and I want that bread because it looks nice today and it'll look the same tomorrow. It looks like that because the flour is consistent and it will give the same baking quality properties. And it does that because it's the same flour coming in and it's a one variety in the field. So it's a consumer behaviour as well that has to work with the science and with the farmers to change biodiversity. And just to show you an example, these are different varieties of oats that were from the Irish Heritage Oats collection and from some Welsh material as well. And they all look very different, and nutritionally they're very different. So there's an awful lot that we have in our what we call biobanks or stores that we can use and take back out. And don't reinvent the mistakes of the past. Don't focus on one variety. By focusing on more varieties, we get more diverse nutrition, we get more resistance to diseases, we get much healthier soils. So it's a win-win all round. And just to point out, just the next slide as well, please. Just to point out an example there, we work with countries in the Nordic regions to try and reintroduce oats. So my big passion is the Western Seaboard. And reintroducing more crop diversity into the Western Seaboard in Ireland. And one of the examples there is where we're working in Donegal, where we trialled 30 varieties eventually, but we started off with 400 varieties and realised there are varieties of oats that are much better adapted than the 1 or 2 varieties that are grown now. And there's an awful lot more biodiversity that could be grown there and are more profitable for farmers, giving better yields, healthy plants with lower inputs. So, next slide please. Heritage, I mentioned about genetics, and you'll hear some more about heritage material. Most varieties, for example, of wheat, I do a lot of wheat with the G20 Global Wheat Initiative, come from a handful of parents, a very small gene bank. Now, there's a huge work to increase that, but we already have that in Ireland. This is a picture of a disease that attacks, it's a huge disease in Africa, it's a huge disease globally, and it attacks wheat, barley and oats. And it should, my hand is there and you see this head, it should all be green, but it's not. The top is bleached. And the reason it's bleached, a fungus has gone in and killed the plant. And in Africa, this is a particularly big problem because they tend to get, this fungus produces lots of toxins, and many regions don't have legislation or the ability to test for the toxins. So you're eating food that is a food safety concern. In Europe, we have standards and legislation, so you don't. But we looked, every bar on this graph is a different variety of the crop. And in this case, the crop is wheat, and they're heritage material. The higher the bar, the more disease. The smaller the bar, the less disease. The one on the far side is the one that is grown by farmers in the field. And the one on my side is the one that has the most disease resistance and good yield. So we know by going back into biobanks in Ireland and land races in Africa and similar collections all over the world, we can reimagine agriculture by using biodiversity more with lower inputs and more disease resistance. And then we work through projects. Technology is technology. It's very good for small farmers. I'm a big advocate for it for the western seaboard of Ireland. I had a big oat project where I was a bit stupid, not the first time, but when I said, oh yeah, let's all collaborate, we'll reintroduce oats to the western seaboard. And then I had Carlo and from the UCD farm then bring the cultivators to cultivate the farm. And I couldn't get in the gate because these farmers had never grown crops. And I thought, all right, okay, we need to go back. And now drone technology is at it. So we work with drone technology. There's all sorts of technology now where you can have very integrated farms, produce a lot from a small area. We're not talking about hectares of wheat or barley here. We're talking about wheat and barley with animals, with blueberries, etc. A very integrated system. Next slide, please. So, just to finish, the last thing is, not only can you breed new varieties or look at the historic varieties for disease resistance, just like different people can differ in their microbiome, plants can differ in their microbiome, the bugs that live inside them. And through breeding, producing new varieties by crossing, you can change that. And you can reintroduce new bugs into the crop. The plant, the genetics of the plant and the genes they have are able to support those bugs. So we showed that in a project. What does this graph mean? All it means is we showed that there are particular bugs in plants that you can breed for that support healthy plants and low toxin levels in the plant. And this is really simple technology. It's very cheap, it's very easy to apply, and we have to go back and valorize the material we have all around the world in genetic banks. So just to finish, big advocate for plants for small farmers and getting more sustainable systems that are more diverse, not one fits all. And really to look at concerted efforts on crops. You know, when I was very young, I used to worry when I was 6 or 7 when they talked about oil, because I think, they're taking oil out of the ground, what's going in? What's replacing it? And now I think when people talk about we export 90%, it actually gives me the jitters, because for me, we're exporting our gold in our animals. And our soil is our goal. And I think we need to protect that with plants and everything else and reimagine it. For me, it really actually, even still, it gives me the jitters when people say that's a brilliant thing. I'm thinking, what's gone in that animal? What's gone out of the country? And I think we really need to put a very different valorisation system on the whole food system, and a shout out for crops particularly. I'll finish there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fiona. So next up, we have Matt Smith, who is CEO of Hometree, leading a large-scale native woodland restoration across Ireland. He works at the intersection of nature restoration, community engagement, and systems change, and he's going to talk to us about biodiversity and nature.
I think I'm going to test you to ring the bell. I really thought you were going to ring it there, but we need to hear that bell at some point today. I suppose if I had I'd love your start, if I had a take-home message, all that we love in nature in Ireland now, or lots of what we love, lots of the biodiversity that we love in nature right now is tragically holding on by a hair's breadth. That's the message. In my opinion, it's the truth. And I've only got 12 minutes, so do most people know what a native tree is versus a non-native tree? If you do, put your hand up. Okay. If you know what this tree is, put your hand up. You can have this one. This is a hard one. I might not give it away. But does anybody know what this one is? You're not allowed. Come on, Duncan. I can't accept that. You know what it is? I've only got 10 minutes. Have a look. It's an aspen, right? And it's one of Ireland's very few native trees. We have about 25 of them. These aspen, they are functionally they're extinct in Ireland right now. Without human intervention, they will not grow. Out of the 25 trees that we have that are native to here, 10 or 11 of them are grown in commercial nurseries. The rest of them aren't. They're not having care taken of them, just like this poor aspen here. Duncan, you can have that anyway. I'd love you to have it. There's very few of them around. So we know who's in the room. I got a nice introduction. Thank you so much. Maybe we can put your hands up if you love nature, just as a nice affirmation. I do 2 hands, maybe a little dance. Maybe we could kind of just quickly close our eyes and just think what our favorite tree is. And when I count down from 5 to 0, at 0 you're going to say it out loud, quietly or loudly. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We're going to do the same again. We're going to do for our native animals, birds, bugs, whatever you want. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All of those animals and all of those trees are what we're talking about, and lots more. All of these cool bugs that live on these cool crops. It's just so wicked and beautiful. Cool. That was the introduction that I didn't know that I was going to do. So you had a nice introduction to me. This slide, I'm going to finish on it as well. This is a mountain range in Scotland, and they just put up one deer fence, and all of the stuff on the right re-emerged. In absence of the fence, this wouldn't have happened. The bog myrtle grew back, a beautiful shrub layer, and then some native trees started coming in. The bog in this picture, even after 25 years of a fence, is still in excellent condition. The shrub layer is better than this would be great for birds and trees and insects at once. We don't have to compete in the wider landscape. A little bit about me, if you can. This is me. I was a surfer. I did a lot of sailing. I grew vegetables for about 10 years, and then in 2020, moved my attention to woodland creation. Now I work for Hometree, it's a charity based in Ennistimon. We have about 40 staff. We've grown quite considerably in the last few years. Considerably and tragically, there is a nature and there is a woodland problem. So downstream of that, groups like us start to emerge and are successful. Our success is tragic, but it's there anyway. One of the things that I've really enjoyed doing is working together with people, bringing people together, trying to get their hands in the ground, trying to collect them around nature. This slide is some of the nature-connected events that we've put on. The top left picture was the start of Tollef BO in Clough Jordan back in 2014 at our Feeding Ourselves gathering. The one in the middle is an ocean festival I put on in 2013 in Cornwall. Some Hometree events. We recently had the new Ag Minister come to Hometree. The picture in the middle is the Irish Native Woodland Alliance, which formed last year, had our first meeting last month. And the bottom picture is one of our founders, Maher, who isn't with us today, but he's part of all of those animals and trees that we were thinking of. This is what the work that I do and the work of my team do. We're really thinking about large-scale landscape restoration. We have a vision of around 60,000 acres in 10 years under some form of management and restoration. It's massive. It will cost about 300 million. Last year, our turnover was 2 million. This year, it might be 4 or a little bit more. We've got a really, really long way to go. If we hit our target of 60,000 acres, it represents 0.3% of Ireland. It's tiny. You wouldn't see it when you take off in Shannon or Knock. We need 10 or 20 of Hometrees to have equally as a crazy vision, to raise a crazy amount of money, to even ever see a difference in our lifetimes. If we don't, that hair's breadth, those animals and trees that we were thinking about will not exist if we don't do something about them. Current state of nature in Ireland, I think it's really important to say these aren't my opinions. You know, out of our special habitats in Ireland, 85% of them are in unfavorable condition and they are declining. 51% of them are deteriorating, they're getting worse and worse, and we're talking about curlews, salmons, puffins, barn owls, hedgehogs, swifts, swallows, house martin, all of the animals that we probably said they're in a declining position. They are not getting better. I often get told I don't have hope in my chats. Why would I? How could I? It would be so unfair on everyone if I did. But I am hopeful, I am active, I'm passionate, things are changing, my world is exciting. But this is very indicative. This is why it's declining, this woodland on a hillside in Kerry. The woodland that's there is a geriatric woodland. There is not fresh trees growing up underneath it. They're herbivores, deer and sheep. They're eating all of the young trees. The woodlands, the tiny bits of woodlands that we have remaining are not replenishing themselves. People probably already know this. We'd love to see tons of woodlands in Ireland. This graph is particularly fascinating for me. I hope people can see it. It was from The Guardian a few months ago. Ireland is, out of 60 countries, Ireland is one of the people in Ireland feel least connected to nature, which is hard to imagine for the people in this room who probably all have a nice garden, probably grow our vegetables. We all have access to nature. It's hard to imagine that not everybody does. There's tons of reason for it. Also, I'm Cornish, not English. I hope you can understand that. There's tons of reasons for it. They're all sad, but it doesn't change the situation or the position that we're in. And on the flip side of that, this graph is really important. We're trying to raise 300 million. This graph is fascinating for me. Oh, the graph that I'm looking at, not you guys. International money goes to projects that have a big land, the land is big. So if I have 10,000 acres, I could attract really good international corporate finance to put that land into restoration. That's why the money for biodiversity projects goes to America, South America, some parts of Eastern Europe, Africa. That money doesn't come to countries like Ireland, often colonized countries that have very small land holdings. It's just not feasible. So the money for nature restoration is going to countries that have big land holdings, but yet the countries that need it, who have little nature connection, we're systemically kept away from the money that we need to improve our connection with nature and the amount of biodiversity in Ireland. The next one, oh, I'm going the wrong way, am I? The next one is that one, this one. This one's the most fascinating one for me. So we have low connection, we're not attractive from an international finance point of view, and the money that was given to Ireland through philanthropy in 2024 was 5 million euros. Even Hometree needs all of that. We need 300, and we need 20 or 50 or 100 of us to exist to actually see something different. The total amount of money in America that went to nature was 25 billion. So we need, like Hometree, we need more than what's there, and Ireland needs more than what's there, so we have to go other places to have a look. Back to that one, the note that I had is, I know coffee shops in the Hinch that make more money than 5 million euros. Like, let that settle in, it's so gnarly. So I have like a slide that's on hope. I am hopeful. I think it's possible. I think Hometree are going to have a really nice time building an organization that will fit nicely in a sector, and we're going to attract quite a bit of state money, probably some corporate money, some donations as well, because we're going to succeed. The organization that we run will do well. I have to say that. I run the organization. I have to believe that because I run the organization. The plan is we have to restore land. We have to do landscape restoration at scale to prove it can be done. We need pilots in different parts of the country to prove that it can be done. We need to build more of these places that people can come and reconnect with nature in a meaningful way, understand it in a meaningful way. We need to deliver excellently and cheaply. Jesus, the charity sector has its work cut out for itself. We have to do everything all at once, and we can never make a mistake. But we also need to do restoration really well, and then we need to find a way to finance it on scale. That still doesn't necessarily exist, and it's really important that we get the community involved with us. This picture is like the fence. This picture is like the fence picture, but the Irish version. This is in Ireland in a lake in, say, like mid-Kerry. This is where the herbivores have been kept out of. It can really happen. It can happen really fast. I believe it's going to happen in the next decade or two. It's not what happens, it's maybe how it happens, who owns the land, if it's still native or local indigenous people, and who does the work, and what type of actions we use to do the work, whether we use big machines and chemicals, or we have more of a metal and we get our hands and we get more connected into nature. I'm going to go under time. Thanks. Amazing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Matt. So our next speaker now is Grace Maher, who has over 20 years of experience in the organic sector as a grower, teacher and developmental officer with the Irish Organic Association. She's a PhD candidate in SETU, and she researches heritage wheat for organic cultivation. Her talk's going to cover sector growth and the need to diversify research knowledge in organic agriculture. So Grace is going to talk to us about exploring agrobiodiversity from an organic perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And thanks very much for the invitation to come and speak here. And I hope to champion the farmer in my talk, because that's where my roots lie. I grew up on a tillage farm in Carlow. And when you grow up on a farm in Ireland, while you might try and shake the mantle, it has a way of catching up on you. So while I studied English and history initially in Maynooth, and was proudly there when Mary was running her campaign to be the first female president of Ireland, and I voted for you. So, and then I went to California, as many people of my era did, where I found out about organic food, because at that time in Ireland, nobody was really talking about organic. I interned with an organisation called Food First, based in Oakland. Some of you might be familiar with. And I learned about GM food and the possible threat it had towards agriculture. So I came back to Ireland and I studied organic horticulture. So I come to, I suppose, growing from a tradition of putting the plant first, so echoing what Fiona said earlier, we need more plant champions in Ireland. So I'll talk a little bit about organic agriculture in Ireland, and then I'll talk also about how
we are working to build a local organic grain supply. So my first slide was nicely done with AI, and that's where we parted ways, because AI didn't like my pictures of real farmers and grain. So I decided, you know what, this is taking up far too much time. I'm just going to use my own slides. So I'm not going to really dwell on this too long because it's been touched on. So agriculture in Ireland, where do we start, where do we end? One thing which isn't on the slide, I'll say, is that the last census carried out in 2022 indicated that there was 133,174 farms in Ireland. So predominantly the family farm model, which is unusual across Europe. That's changed slightly perhaps in the last decade, where we've had a bit more corporate takeover of land. But it's interesting to put that. So we still have the family farming model. What we don't kind of, I suppose, point out to is a lot of farmers are now part-time because they cannot make a living from food production. As I said, I grew up on a tillage farm. My mother worked from home, as in stay-at-home mother, and my father put 6 children through college. You could not do that now, being an average-size tillage farm in Ireland. One thing I'd like to also point out is the land area under cereal production. This is conventional, not organic. It has reduced 40% in the last 40 years. So cereals and plants have not been a priority, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. Sorry. This has also been touched on, and having been an organic vegetable grower and sold produce at the farmers market, where I tried back in 2004 to explain to people in Carlow that salad leaves were the next big thing when they asked for butterhead lettuce. It was challenging, but rewarding nonetheless. But we do import so much horticulture in Ireland, and particularly I'd like to bring your attention to the 100 million that we spent on onions, carrots, turnips, and cabbage, all of which can be grown here year-round, but also with storage. And it was alluded to in one of the conversations this morning about one of the major carrot growers who went out of business after Christmas. And I know him well. He produced conventional and organic, and he said he did not make any money for the last 2 years growing vegetables in Ireland. So that's a red flag if we ever needed a red flag. And I'm just going to touch on wheat, because I am going to talk about heritage wheat. And I'm just sowing a little seed, which is that, and we import about approximately 300,000 tonnes of flour into Ireland every year to make bread. Less than 1% of the flour that is used to bake bread in Ireland is grown and milled here. So that's something that we don't really take into consideration when we talk about cereal production. My background is really rooted in organics, and actually it's kind of a nice place to be, because I don't really know a huge amount about chemical production. I don't know about the fungicide applications. I don't work to that calendar. I work to the calendar of what is going on in the plant at a given time, what's it trying to tell me, what's the soil it's been grown in, and also the seed. So it's a little bit different, and I will also say over the last 25 years, it's been tricky, you know, and in Ireland, we don't really champion organics, but I'll come back to that a little bit. So just to give an overview, I suppose, of what defines organics, the International Federation for Organic Agricultural Movement in 2005 said, yeah, let's talk about how we can, I suppose, sell the idea or explain what organics is about. So there's 4 guiding principles: the principles of health, principle of ecology, principle of fairness, and principle of care. And Lady Eve Balfour said it nicely way back in the 50s when she said that the health of soil, plant, animal, and man is one and indivisible. So that's a concept that still rings true. So I'm going to touch on organic agriculture in Ireland. So prior to 2023, at the end of 2022, we were 2.2%, the 3rd lowest in Europe. So while we're very good at marketing Ireland as the green producing country, from an organic point of view, we were the 3rd lowest in Europe. So when 2023, there was a European Green Deal, specifically the Farm to Fork strategy, set a target to have 25% of EU land certified organic by 2030. So it meant Ireland had a long way to climb. And each of the member states set their own strategic plan, which was approved to set their national targets. So in Ireland, we set a target to have 7.5% organic by 2030. So not ambitious, really, let's just be honest, because at that point, that was the European average for land area. Some countries in Europe are 25% organic. There's about 14 countries which are over 10% organic. So, not to be despondent, in 2023, there was a new cycle of the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, which basically pays support and incentivizes farmers to produce food. And as a result of that, the organic farming scheme, the payments were increased, and we had a 221% increase in the number of farmers that went into organic, bringing us up to 5.8%. So we're still haven't reached the target, and it's still, quite frankly, not enough ambition, in my humble opinion. So who are the farmers that are farming organically in Ireland? What's the breakdown? 48% sheep farmers, 41% beef farmers, 11% everybody else. But that's probably not strictly true insofar as if you're an organic sheep farmer, you may also produce organic cereals. So this is really your primary enterprise that you have on farm. We've got lots of organic farmers that are actually doing lots of the above. They're also on-farm processing, they're selling direct to consumers, and there's a lot of women involved in it. So the gender breakdown is a little bit different, and so is the enterprise than conventional. Organic cereals, which I'm going to touch on a bit more. So the blue bar is organic oat production. So if you're an organic cereal producer, most people are producing oats. Why? Because there is a demand for the product in terms of human consumption. And that's the area I'm particularly interested in, looking at grown crops for human consumption. And there's one processor, Flahavans, household name, and they're an excellent company in terms of how they support farmers, how they pay farmers, and basically, their organic market is in double-digit growth for the last 10 years. So their organic porridge is a successful product. You'll see down there, wheat is 273 hectares. So most of the organic wheat in Ireland is grown for animal consumption. So what are we doing about that? So personally, I said, we've got all these farmers coming into organics. We don't actually carry out very much research on organic farming in Ireland. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go back and look at, is there a possibility of bringing in some diversity into what farmers are growing? Because there's a reliance on oats. So can we look at other crops that may have a market value or that there's a market demand for? So the title of my topic is The Potential of Heritage Wheat as a Crop for Organic Cultivation. And I'm doing it in SETU under the supervision of Dr. Stephen Whelan and Dr. John Carroll. So what I'm doing is not particularly innovative. Where it is innovative is because there's very little research being done in organics. So I think I've mentioned that twice. And for me, wheat, I suppose growing up on a tillage farm, but wheat is a very interesting crop. And Fiona alluded to it earlier. For me, wheat is the standout crop it's the example of our broken food system in Ireland, because we produce huge volumes of wheat conventionally. And our yields are probably one of the highest in Europe. But to get a high yield, you need a high input. So you need a lot of chemicals to actually get a high yield. We import the seed, we import the chemicals, and then we feed the wheat to animals or we export it. So there's not much sustainability in that context. But also when we look at wheat, thanks for the 2-minute warning, it is culturally significant across the world. About 20 to 40% of daily calories come from wheat consumption. Most countries, most cultures break bread in some form or another. And that's, I think, why wheat is fascinating. My research has been funded by Research Ireland and the National Organic Training SkillNet. I've just put up 3 sustainable development goals, but it touches on lots more because for me, agrobiodiversity is central and bringing biodiversity into the field is huge. So I'll quickly go through some of these. So when I talk about what my research is looking at, it's actually looking at making bread, sourdough bread. So we have over 300 artisan bakers now in Ireland. They want organic flour because consumers are asking for organic flour. also Irish. So it's actually quite interesting from that point of view because it's been market-led. These are 3 organic farmers. I'm carrying out my research on farms. So for me, it was hugely important to have a participatory approach. So I have an organic farmer that is willing to work with me in Tipperary, in Carlow, and in Meath. And for me, this is the metal. So bringing the farmer's knowledge, bringing the little bit of knowledge that I have, but bringing that all collectively along the way is hugely important, because this is the part that's forgotten in Ireland. We don't champion what's been done at farm level enough. So this is just the field design. So I'm doing field trials for 3 years. I'm in year 3. I have 4 varieties of heritage wheat. The really tall ones that you were talking about, Fiona, earlier. I'm growing those tall, beautiful wheats. I will mention that the seed is not Irish, much to my, I suppose it was quite sad actually, because there wasn't enough Irish heritage seed available. So I had to import from a baker, a farmer, and a miller in the Nordic region. I'll quickly go through it. This is a field of heritage wheat. You might see the difference between the heights. So in the middle is a modern wheat, on the edges is a heritage wheat. I've got 2 more left. I'm looking at grain quality analysis, because how do we qualify what the quality of wheat is? The narrative in Ireland is that we can't grow wheat that will actually make good bread, but that is actually being challenged by bakers because they're doing wonderful things with Irish flour and Irish wheat. And for me, again, it's research engagement, but actually this is part of the wider MEHL. So I have bakers who are actually baking with the wheat that I'm growing and giving me their input. So we tick the boxes, but I also want their intuition, what the wheat means to them. This is my last slide. So next steps. This is actually Irish heritage wheat. So I have managed to procure some seed of old Irish varieties, so heritage being pre-1950, and I'm growing them out, and it will be a long, arduous task, but there they are in all their beauty. And I do think, if we're talking about take-home messages, in Ireland we talk about, maybe realising that we're food insecure. We are completely seed insecure. We have no native seed production. A little shout out to the Irish Seed Savers Association and the work that they've done as seed guardians. We do not champion seed guardians in Ireland. We touched on this morning about, on Gorta Moore, actually somehow seed has not been given any attention, any resources, and it is to our detriment because we are completely reliant on importing seed. And that really, when you look at the historical context, it beggars belief, but that's where we are. So agrobiodiversity, it is for everybody. It is for farmers, it is for researchers, it is for bakers, it is for consumers. It is everybody's job to actually preserve the agrobiodiversity, and we need to do it quickly. So, thank you.